Hi everybody, my name is James. Welcome to King's Fine Woodworking. Today we're going to start our 16-week Woodworking 101 course. We've had a lot of different woodworkers ask us questions about some basic tools, some introduction to woodworking questions, things like that. And so I thought we would compile a course where we sort of talked about all of the basics of woodworking. We broke it down. We've created a little bit of a curriculum and we're breaking it into 16 parts. It's completely free. Everything is going to be on YouTube. And I'm going to have some handout sheets that you can download from our website to accompany some of the projects that are going to happen. And there's also going to be some projects that we're going to build during the course of the 16-week session. I'm going to provide the plans for the projects. They'll also be free. I'll put a link to those in the descriptions of these videos when the time comes for those. You'll be able to download those, and if you like, you can follow along and build those projects at home as we cover all of the details of that build. Before I begin today, I would like to thank a couple of groups of people who have been instrumental in me being able to do this. For all the videos that we've had so far, whenever I build something during the course of the video and I use a particular tool or a particular type of supply, sandpaper or glue or just anything that I use, I oftentimes put those links to the items I use in the descriptions below the videos. Those links are Amazon affiliate links. So anybody who goes in and purchases items through those links, maybe it's something that you need already anyway, but if you purchase the items through those links, Amazon takes a small percentage of that sale and gives that to us. It helps support our channel. And the other group of people that I would like to thank are Patreon subscribers. We have a dedicated group of people who watch our videos who help support the channel entirely through Patreon. There's a link to Patreon in the description below also if you're unfamiliar with what that is. But those two groups of people have been really instrumental in helping us to come up with the funds to create this series of videos. And whenever we have money to do projects like that, we like to turn around, reinvest that back into video production. And so that's kind of the main reason we're able to do this today. So I would like to just say thank you to everybody out there who does that. And I think now we're going to go ahead and start with today's lesson. Okay, so today's episode, we're going to talk about tools. Obviously, if you're going to do woodworking, you have to have tools. You can't do woodworking without them. I am primarily a power tool user, but to do any type of woodworking, really, you need both. You can't exist with power tools alone. So we're going to cover all of the basics that a person might need to begin woodworking, and then we're going to cover some substitutes because not everybody's going to have everything available to them up front. So we'll talk about some substitutes for certain types of tools. For example, if you don't have a bandsaw, you can use a jigsaw. We'll cover that. And I'm not just going to put a list of tools together for you. I'm going to show you the basics about each tool. Okay, so the first thing we're going to start with is a circular saw. This is probably, in terms of beginner tools, this is probably the most important tool that you can start with. I prefer cordless tools. Your tools don't have to be cordless. I like cordless because I don't like dragging a cord around the shop. Today's modern cordless tools, batteries last a very, very long time. I'm invested in the DeWalt system, but you don't have to get DeWalt. I've also used Milwaukee. They're fantastic. I've used Makita. They're also fantastic. I've also used Ryobi. So there's a big variety of tools that you can look into. So let's start with the circular saw anyhow. Okay, so this particular saw is a 6.5-inch blade, and I think if you have a corded saw, most of those are 7.25-inch blades. The fact that this blade is a little bit smaller in diameter is not actually critical. It doesn't really make a difference for most of the cuts that you'll make. Okay, so there are many different blade choices that you can purchase for a saw like this. A typical blade that's for construction, and maybe if you're cutting soft woods, if you're not looking for a fine finish, for a saw this size, it'd be maybe an 18-tooth blade. This is a carbide tipped blade. You can't really tell the carbide tips here are painted over, but it is a carbide tipped blade. And then if you want to get a little bit finer of a finish, you'd go with maybe a 40-tooth blade. This is also carbide. Something with more teeth is going to give you a smoother cut with less tear out. And that's important if you're cross-cutting or if you're just trying to get a really fine finish. So I would say for most furniture projects, you would be using this blade. A 40-tooth blade would be the most common. And sometimes if you're cutting plywood, they actually also make plywood blades. And these are okay. To my opinion, they're not carbide. In my opinion, they're not quite as good as a 40-tooth carbide blade, but it does work with minimal tear out for plywoods, also for plastics and certain veneers. So that's an option as well. This is the table of the saw here. And there's some different components that you should be familiar with. A lot of the cordless saws have a trigger release. So the trigger isn't going to squeeze until you depress the trigger release. Once you depress the trigger release here, then you can squeeze the trigger. This is the guard. This is what protects you from the blade. When you're done making a cut, it's important never to fasten this out of the way. Always let it go. When you're done making a cut, you can set this down, and that'll prevent your blade from cutting into whatever surface. It also makes the blade safer to use, or the saw safer to use in general. We have other things that are part of the blade here. This is the lock that allows you to adjust the depth of cut. So if I hold this out of the way, you can see that the higher up and down this goes, it alters the depth of cut. When you get it to whatever depth of cut you're looking for, this will be the locking mechanism to lock it at that height. One thing I usually do when I set the depth of cut for added safety is I will, whatever wood that I'm cutting, I'll try to set it up so that the blade just cuts a little bit deeper than the wood. And that's fine. You can see with that particular setting there that I can safely cut all the way through this wood. It's usually not a good idea to lower this to where you're using a maximum depth of cut for this. It could be dangerous. You might cut through and hit something that you don't intend to cut. So for safest practice, I always like to set the table so that it just barely cuts through the wood. It's a good idea to also pick a saw that has an option of a bevel cut. So the bevel cut is typically something here. You would release the locking mechanism, and then you can rotate the table to some angle. There are some gradations here to some angle so that you can cut a bevel. And then when it returns back to square, there's usually a set point. In this particular case, there's a set screw here that will bump against here, come all the way back to let you know you've reached 0 again, and we can lock that down. And a good thing to do, especially if you get a used saw or even if you get a new one, is to check it. And you want to make sure that after you have set it back to 0, that your saw does actually come all the way back to 0, and that that's perfectly square. If for any reason that's not square, then you can use the set screw here. And all saws have something like this. And you can just change the depth of that set screw so that when this comes back to a closed position, you end up at your 90-degree angle between the table and the blade. Okay, so if you're going to make a cut, before you make your cut, you need to make sure that this is locked down tight and that your depth is also locked down tight. You don't want to start making a cut and accidentally have one of these two locks off and have it move on you during the cut. It can be dangerous. You can generate some kickback, and of course you'll mess up your cut. And another important thing to know for mini saws, let me see your tape measure, Si. Another important thing to know is what the width of this table is, or basically where it is from the edge of one of these carbide teeth over to the edge of the fence. So it's very difficult to just take a measurement and see what that amount is, but I'm going to show you a little technique that I use to do that. And the reason that we need to know that is because sometimes when we go to cut a piece of wood, let's take this here. Sometimes we go to cut a piece of wood, we need to put down a straight edge. And we'll take the straight edge and we'll cut with a piece of wood against the straight edge. And this gives us a straight cut. But since you see there's some distance between the blade and the edge of the table, and the edge of the table is what's going to ride against the straight edge. And since we have a distance there, it's a good idea to know what that distance is. If I know what that distance is, then however much I want to cut, I know I can set my straight edge that many inches back away from it and end up cutting exactly on the line that I'm looking for. So I'm going to show you how to do that. Okay, so another really important tool or an accessory to have when you have a circular saw is a straight edge clamp. We need a straight edge so that we can cut straight. You can buy inexpensive ones that you could clamp down, or you could have one that acts like a clamp like this one. Okay, so the way this one works is we make sure that the sliding clamping mechanism is out of the way, and we'll just turn it over in the right orientation on the board where we're going to make our cut, and we'll slide the whole clamp up to the locking edge, raise the locking lever all the way up, keep it tight, and we'll slide the sliding mechanism over till it's snug, hold it in place, and then we'll clamp the lever. And you'll see it's actually very strong. It's actually moving our whole 500-pound assembly table here. Maya is going to set the depth on the circular saw. We're going to do all these things before we put the battery in. So she's going to set the depth so that it just cuts a little bit below the surface of the wood. There's no need in using the entire depth. And this is just a safety measure. And that's locked down nice and snug. Okay, now we can go ahead and put the battery in, and we will make this first cut. And the reason we're making this cut is actually to determine the distance from the edge of the table to where the blade is. Okay, so now I'm going to take a measurement and I'm going to find out the distance from where the blade cut to where the edge of the table on the saw was. And if we take a look there, we can see that was right at 4 1/16 of an inch. And I'm going to show you something that a lot of people who just start using tape measures do. If you look at this from above, I'm obviously exaggerating this, but if I take a measurement this way at an angle, that's clearly not accurate. So it's very important to take a measure perpendicular to the surface that you're trying to measure, or basically going parallel with whatever edge that you're trying to measure. That's more accurate. Even holding it a little bit off, if we're talking long distances, can change your measurement by a 1/16 or even more, and that's going to make a mistake or cause a mistake for you down the road in your project. So let's say that I need this piece of wood to be at 16 inches. So I might make a mark at 16 inches, and I might mark both sides at 16 inches. And this is where I want the blade to cut, at 16 inches. However, I can't take my straight edge and set it at this 16-inch mark, because I know if my fence runs along here, my blade is 4 1/16 further out. So somehow I'm going to have to put this back here by some distance, and that distance is one that we just measured at 4 1/16. So instead of using 16 inches as my mark, I'm going to go back by 4 1/16. So I'll go back to 12 and then lose another 16th. So 11 15/16 and 11 15/16. And if I were to check that, I would see that that is 4 1/16 back from where I want my cut to be. Then I can take my straight edge and I would line my straight edge up with the marks that are at 11 15/16, lock it down, and then when I make my cut, I know my cut's going to be out here. And so that's really the important reason why we need to know this distance on the saw, the distance from the blade to the edge of the fence. And sometimes what I'll do is I'll take a Sharpie and I might make a mark here. This is just a pencil, I know, but I might make a mark of 4 1/16 of an inch, just something so that I always remember the distance from this edge to the edge of the carbide tooth on the blade. Hi everybody, I wanted to say thank you very much for watching, and I have made a couple of small changes. I've decided to take the first video, the first lesson of the 16-week course, and break it into 8 subsections. When I got done filming it and I got done editing it, it was pretty long. It was about almost an hour and a half, and I thought that was too much for anybody to sit through, so I just broke that down into 8 categories, one for each subsection. I'm going to try to post one each day. So this one's coming up now, and then I'll do one each day until they're all out, and then we'll try to go, one video per week after that. Okay, so one other thing is that we talk about a lot of tools in this lesson number 1, and I just wanted you to have access or to know what each of these tools are. These are the tools that I use every day in my shop, and I have composed a list of all of these tools and links where they can be bought at the best price. And I'll keep a list of that, or a copy of that, in the description. I'll also have the list in a downloadable, like a PDF format, which I'll put up on my website. That's for anybody to download who's interested in having a copy of that. Once again, I want to say thank you for watching. I hope you found some valuable information in this. I know going through all of the tools can be a little bit tedious, but the course should definitely pick up and get a lot more exciting once we get into that. So thanks again, and we'll see you next video.